Right. So, welcome to another OpenChain webinar. This is an update on the OSI definition for OpenAI. And this is following up on something that we covered initially around last November, where we were looking at how the open source initiative is engaging with the topic of what is open AI? What's open for everyone to use, study, share, and improve, or access, or somehow do something else? And the challenge has been that AI is different to open source software. It makes use of open source software in many aspects, but you have other things to consider, such as data and documentation. Well, they've been doing a lot of work on this complex topic and talking to a lot of people. So this update will help give you some context of how the conversation around OpenAI is developing. Before we get started, I'm just showing our antitrust policy notice. We show this at the beginning of every meeting that we hold here in the Linux Foundation. You'll find the full antitrust policy on our website. And if you're from a member company, you can ask questions of our counsel, Andy Updegrove. If you're not from a Linux Foundation member company and you have questions, of course, you can ask those questions to the counsel of your own corporation. With that formality over, let's have a look at who is going to be talking today. And it's Stefano Maffulli, the Executive Director of the Open Source Initiative. Now, I grabbed some text from LinkedIn where he has a little bit of a self-introduction, mentioning his work as a leader in open source and his marketing and community building experience, his multicultural cross-geography experience, speaking, and so on. But that, I think, doesn't really capture the breadth of Stefano's work. For several decades now, he's been engaged with and contributing to open source software at the most important strategic levels. So to have him today talking about this new ground, this new complexity of trying to describe OpenAI is a treat. The QR code will take you to his LinkedIn. So, for those of you watching this recording who want to dive in and connect with Stefano, please do so. He's super friendly and nice. Now,
Thank you.
well, it's true. Stefano, I must say you're very responsive to all kinds of questions, and what I do love is seeing you at conferences and so on, and being so open to just hanging out and talking with whoever comes by with a question. It's a genuine service to the community.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
So, you know, OpenAI, the complexity of the fact that there's models, data, documentation, trying to determine what's closed, what's open, what's somewhere in the gray area, not an easy task. And the OSI has been looking at this topic for quite a while. We're very fortunate today on our call to have also some parties with some experience in looking at other aspects of AI. For instance, Matthew Crawford is co-chair of the OpenChain AI study group, and he's looking at AI compliance topics in the supply chain. As always, everyone on the call is welcome to jump in with questions and ideas and comments. And at this point, we hand over to our speaker. And Stefano, the floor is yours. Please present in any manner you wish and take the screen and help us understand this topic.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I really appreciate the introduction. Very nice words. And thank you for the invitation because it gives me really the opportunity to wrap up, to not wrap up, but to tell the story of since November when we first talked and update the community. So you may be familiar with the Open Source Initiative, which is the recognized authority that maintains the definition of open source, what it really means, and it's recognized by individuals, companies, and also public institutions globally And we have three main buckets, three main programs of activity. The more classic has been the maintenance of the list of licenses that have been approved by to comply, reviewed by the community, and approved to as complying with the open source definition, the 10 points. We also have a policy expanded into policy. We monitor policy, and we work with standard setting organizations all over the world, where we're trying to cover the world to make sure that the policymakers are educated about the values of open source, and so the ecosystem is preserved. And we have another branch of advocacy and research, and this is where we've been doing this investigation of what is open source AI. We call it open source AI since the term open AI has been polluted by a company that open has nothing to do with open. And we have also we have also this new property called opensource.net, which is a website for the community available to tell stories about the community. And we have a very wonderful program running now to contribute to the conversation around doing business with and around open source software. So have a look at the articles that are coming up on that channel. So let's talk about open source AI and why we're doing this. It's because why we started looking at the open source initiative, because technology evolves, and every single step in the evolution we recognize that it forces at re-looking at our principles. Are they still valid? And these exercises is constantly happening in many pieces of the technological world, like around mobile, around cloud. We're still asking questions around what is open source in the space where you're interrogating a service through an API, like the software is. What is the source code in that domain? But we needed to talk about AI more urgently, because legislation has already appeared in Europe. There are a lot of models, a lot of new artifacts that are being released on the market and being made available, and gatekeepers like the big corporations that are acting, building moats, whether they're technical or legal in other ways. And also everything is changing very rapidly. So if the open source community as a whole, we took that as an opportunity to say, let's help the open source community, the whole ecosystem, to understand what's happening in this new domain, and make sure that we have answers for regulators, and also for companies, for nonprofit organizations, and all the actors that are invested in a digital society mediated by AI systems. So we gave ourselves an objective to have a definition of open source AI that would be recognized by a wide array of stakeholders. And we recognized also that we couldn't do it alone. We couldn't sit in a room with a board, for example, at the OSI, or even myself, or any other one single person to stand in their corner and come out with a sacred text out of the cave, right? We knew that it had to be a collaborative process, and the whole community had to quickly come together with shared understanding. And we decided in the fall of 2023 to start the process that we call it, well, it's called co-design process. It's based from this requirement to have a global consultation that would give legitimacy to the definition. And we use co-design as a technique, as a method, because it's designed, it's appropriate, because the decisions of what goes into the definition needs to be made with the stakeholders and not for the stakeholders. So we recognize also that we didn't have a lot of time. If you think about it, the decision to start this process happened around June 2023, when we were still in the infancy. So we just had, as OSI, we just had one large set of like an event, an online event made of interviews with experts through a podcast and panel discussions with experts. And that we were just informing our opinion, and we thought we could have a little bit more time, but really there is a push and an urgency being pushed by outside events. So we needed to really quickly and rapidly come up with tactics and raise funds also to organize this this event. And in order to quickly to speed up the process, we also started from we had this idea of retracing the history of open source, how it became open source definition, how it became what it is, and we traced back the history to the GNU to the early days of free software when the GNU manifesto was being written, and we said, why don't we try to retrace the same history that took 25 years and compress it into a few months. Let's see what we can see. What happened in the past was that a legal framework, copyright, started to be applied to software, and that forced principles to be written by the community that were agreed upon with the GNU manifesto, setting the ground rules of what is the objective, what we want to achieve, and then look at the implementation of those principles in legal sense, which is brought us the licenses and the concepts that, based on copyright, are can grant freedoms, can grant rights to users and developers rather than deprive them. And so we asked with the co-design system asks starts with a question to the group, and the first question that we asked is, we want to have the same rights of to users, developers, deployers of AI systems. We want to have them to have the rights to use study, modify, share. But the verbs are pretty clear. Like, everyone quickly agreed that those were the verbs that we needed to, the freedoms that we needed to grant. But how to do that in the context of AI? And we started with a kickoff co-design meeting in Raleigh at the All Things Open conference. We asked people to brainstorm basically, and for about an hour, and they gave us some answers, and we used those answers to release one draft. And then we did another co-design event in Monterey at the Linux Foundation Member Summit, and we refined that text with another draft and release another draft. Then we asked the same questions at the Digital Public Goods Alliance meeting, members meeting in Addis Ababa in November, and we ended up with these words towards the end of the year. So it's basically the same freedoms. Those of you who recognize the free software definition will just see recognize them. Then at that point, the next question is, what components must be available to you as an expert who wants to modify, share, use, and study an AI system? What components do you need? In December, there was an event from the AI Dev conference, and we asked the question we asked this question, and we started getting answers, and but we also recognized at that stage that we needed to accelerate the process, and so we shifted to creating virtual working groups, and we selected four different systems to be analyzed by volunteers to identify these are the volunteers with their affiliation and the diversity percentages, which we have taken very good care of complying and being comprehensive and global. So we asked these people to take a list of default, let's say, popular components of various machine learning systems, and we asked them to vote for each of the freedoms: use, study, modify, and share. Which of the components were absolutely necessary and under what conditions? And they voted. And this is the place where we recognize for the first time that the volunteers voted in much higher the availability of data pre-processing code as one of the components rather than the actual training data sets. The training data sets were ranked much lower than the data pre-processing code. And that gave us an indication that one of the largest boulder that we identified as the obstacle that we needed to solve, the relationship, and that is the relationship between the training data sets and the training data sets and the trained weights, that some people were arguing that that was basically the same thing as source code of an AI system, data as a source code of a training AI system. In reality, or at least according to these working groups results, that was not the case. The training data set was ranked lower. So considering that the conversation was really stuck and not moving, we made a hypothesis and we released draft 06 for the first time, saying, hey, maybe the training data is less important. Let's see what the reaction of the community is. If we replace a mandate, instead of having a mandate for the training data set to be available, to be released, we tested an hypothesis of let's see what the reaction is from the community. And the reaction was actually quite positive. In other words, it was not as negative as we thought. There were comments on the forum, but they were really rehashing topics that we already knew. Like it was known already that people wanted to have the safety and security and maybe even the reassurance that the whole pipelines to build an AI system would be openly available. But we recognize the obstacle, and in any case, we wanted to test also. We had another question that we wanted to validate the definition. We asked which AI systems meet these criteria, right? So we wanted to see, does the text that doesn't strictly require the data set, the release of the data set, does it perform as expected? In other words, does it let any of the really proprietary, we know, when you recognize when you see them, right? The proprietary systems, do they slip in? And so we picked a dozen different systems that exist for which the weights are available freely and freely or under conditions. I mean, you can download it, can't download them at very least. And we ask people to use the checklist, in other words, the list of components, which is the list of components is coming from the model openness framework of the Linux Foundation's generative AI and data foundation. I think it's a foundation or something, Gen AI and machine learning group. They have this paper authored by Matt White and others that has a list of standardized components for machine learning. And we asked these people, volunteers, to go out and find the components, see if they were available, and make an assessment based on their own personal judgment, if you want, whether any of these systems would comply with the open source definition. And in the review, it was clear, this is one of the table that they use to say, to find the components and look at the conditions of availability or licenses. And we ended up with this. Well, we found some limitations in the approach, which is that if it's hard to find the individual components if you're not the actual developer of the system, because they're scattered all around in different parts of the web. For example, Arctic is released by Snowflake, and a lot of their information is listed on blog posts, and some artifacts artifacts are in GitHub and Hugging Face and on available on the website of the developer. So it's quite hard to really have a good view. But in any case, the expectation, the expectations that Grok would not be the one from XAI would not be confirmed as an open source AI, or Llama 2 was confirmed. And it's not just because of the licenses, but what we found was very strong correlation in this small data set, a small sample. We realized that the data pre-processing code is actually the main indicator of availability of an open source AI, or in other words, an AI that gives you all the information about what's happening, makes you study clearly, because all of the groups, all of the models that release the data pre-processing code and the training code, they also at least make an attempt to release their training data sets. And the most visible ones are Pythia and Olmo, LLM 360. All of them, they have released their data sets. Now, Pythia has a pretty interesting story, because their data set is actually threatened by a copyright lawsuit in the United States, but it's still available. It can be downloaded. So the board asked us to make sure that we have a definition that is approved by different kind of stakeholders, and these are the groups, the representation in the volunteer group. They're mostly all of end users and subjects. All of us are subject of AI. Like, all of subjects are defined by examples are here, like photographers or ourselves, who find our pictures included into a data set, and downstream is the someone who asks for a mortgage, and the bank tellers, use an automatic machine to make a decision, and that would be a subject. But in any case, these are the stakeholder groups, and this is the list of volunteers. So it's really transparent. We really strive for making everything and recognizing affiliation too, so that everyone can judge and make an assessment of who has been helping and what who's been helping in this process. So what's going to happen now in the next couple of months? We have released a draft 008. It's the last one that we have released, but we're working actively on draft 09, also with the support of the OSI board, because once we are expecting a stable version. We don't know yet the numbering or the versioning that we're going to use, but it's going to be the end, like a usable version, at the end of October at All Things Open. And before that, we're going to be doing presentations in different parts of the world, and we're making an effort to do outreach in Asia. We're going to be in Beijing and Hong Kong, and in South America too. Also in Africa, we have I haven't put it in here yet, but we confirmed we're going to have a workshop in September, also in Africa. So I'll give you a very quick preview of what's cooking for draft 009. And the one main change between 08 and 09 is that we're going to be removing the checklist, what we used as a framework to evaluate to run the validation phase. And that is because there have been questions and discussions online on the forums, on the volunteer groups, about the role of OSI to certify open source AI. And that's never been the role of the OSI. So to make it clear that the OSI at this stage has no intention, looks like even the board hasn't issued a full opinion yet, but I don't think that there is any appetite for the open source initiative to ever be defining and reviewing systems. Like, we don't do this for software, and I don't see why we would be wanting to do this for AI. But what we can do is to provide instructions on for the community to run their own assessments and evaluation. We'll talk about that later. So we made the structure is of the definition has a preamble of why we need open source AI. Then we have the four freedoms described, and then the preferred form to modify machine learning specifically. The whole definition talks about AI in general, but then the preferred form to make modifications is a zoom in specifically for machine learning, because machine learning systems are the ones who challenge the open source definition. In other words, algorithmic AI is basically software, doesn't require a new definition. But for the machine learning place where there is the role of data and the role of the weights in the what is actually usable are different, and the way to study, modify, especially require some access to data, to the data used for the training, or at least that's the current technology suggests it does. So in between version 8 and version 9, aside from this separation of the checklist, which we'll talk about, there are small changes only because again, there are not many new arguments right now. There are some clarifications about who is the recipient of the freedoms, and those are going to be listed explicitly as developers, deployers, and end users. This is based on feedback received from the community. I mean, this is all based on feedback received from the community. The drafts are public and are being commented on. The other change is going to be in the open source AI definition. This again, someone requested and made a comment saying that the four freedoms should be attributed correctly to the Free Software Foundation, and that's very fair. So we're going to be making a note here that the four freedoms are the same as the free software definition adapted to the AI space. And some other wordsmithing here about in the what is open source AI section, again, based on feedback. And then on the preferred form to make modifications, which is the most controversial one, we're just clarifying a little bit the concepts of the requirements for code and models, because we're removing the checklist, then some pieces that were listed on the checklist need to be moved up. We're not touching yet the data information piece because it's still being debated heavily. There are still some very strong disagreements from a few selected individuals and one stakeholder organization. So we're giving a little bit of time. We're giving ourselves a little bit of time to socialize this concept a little bit more and make sure that there is sufficient support in favor rather than the ones against. The role of data is recognized by everyone involved as the most crucial and the most complicated one to address and fix, and we want to make sure that we get this element right. Like we can draft 008 right now requires data when it's possible. That's at least the intention. When I say when it's possible, it means when other laws don't prevent the distribution of the data set. Copyright law, privacy law, and other military restrictions. I mean, there are so many laws that revolve around the data and content that make it possible to train but not to distribute. So this dual system that doesn't really apply for software makes the conversation around the role of data more sophisticated and more complicated. So we want to make sure that this part is sufficiently socialized and has community support at the widest possible level. And it's possible that we expect that some people, some group will have disagreement, but we'll have to discuss, first assess how big of that disagreement is. 50-50 split in the community would not be a good result. So let's talk very briefly about the checklist, which is the other big conversation that has happened or that is happening in parallel is about the role of certification. The Model Openness framework has been launched now by the Linux Foundation and is available also as a tool online. It's very interesting, and since we used it for the validation phase, it's quite easy as an exercise to take the list of components in the Model Openness framework and apply the open source AI definition, the concepts in the preferred form to modify, for example, and see which of the components are required at what level. It's easy to see, to map the values of the open source AI definition to the Model Openness framework and recognize from the tool itself where the bar is for open source AI. And if you're familiar with the framework, it's somewhere in between the open tooling and open science. But I put in here also another inspiration, because there are other ways of interpreting openness in AI, and Mozilla has done this framework, and it's very useful also to map and to describe as conversation starters. It's the framework for general purpose AI openness, and it lists components including not just the model components, but also the attributes of the components, like the availability of documentation and the licensing information. And it's quite interesting that you can, you can still, I made this as an exercise, and I think it's not too complicated to map the model, openness framework from Mozilla also to the open source AI definition. So what's coming next is, between now and the end of October, we need to resolve the comments of the 2008 release 009, and then get to the point where we can have a release candidate that has sufficient endorsement, positive endorsement from the community, and where the objections are known and recorded, so that we can go back to that in a later time. And let's talk about also the guidance that the board has given us. And the board really required three criteria to be satisfied. It needs to be supported by diversity, large stakeholders, and globally, and that's very big requirement. The other one that is important is that the definition needs to be providing examples that comply with the definition. In other words, it cannot be set the bar too high so that no open source AI exists, or that the open source AI that exists are sample or niches or just exercises in feasibility. They need to be something that's valuable, and it needs to be ready by October 2024 for the board meeting in person that will happen at the All Things Open conference. These three elements together are required because one of the main reasons to have an open source AI definition that has all three of these elements is having conversations with regulators. Like you noticed, Europe already has a law that needs to be translated into practice. It's predicted that it will generate another 40 to 60 rules and regulations and norms. And the AI Act is very vague and very confusing, the final text. So a lot of the explanations about what is an open source AI, what is an open source model, what is an open model, and open weights, all of these terms are used inside the AI Act, and they have no definition. We need to be able to educate the Commission and the other actors in Europe But also in the United States, there are lots of, well, you know that the White House has asked all of the federal agencies to have an opinion on AI, and the opinions are starting to come up after the release request for comments phase. And all of those conversations need to be driven by the community. Otherwise, the definition will be done. Someone else will be driving those conversations. Right? So we need to act, and we need to be providing examples, pointing at the ones who are doing the right thing. And okay, so yeah, these are the next meetings that we have scheduled, and we're trying to schedule even more as we go and as we have as we raise funds, even though we're stretching our funds a little bit more because we really want to have global coverage. We have received a grant from the Sloan Foundation to do this worldwide tour to socialize to socialize and to develop the open source AI definition. And you can join and you can participate by joining public forums where we announce all of the releases, where we move the larger conversations on the draft to have more breadth and space. But we also have public biweekly town halls where the conversations can continue even more. Like we can have more regular, and we're probably going to change the cadence of the town halls as we get into the crunch of the last 2 months into weekly to get more work done. And yeah, you can become a member individual, or you can also sponsor OSI to help us continue this process, because quite sure it's not going to end in October. We're going to have a way to monitor the effects of the open source AI definition, watch the space, watch the market, watch what the developers are doing, what the deployers are doing, what users are doing, or what their necessities are, and make sure that these feedback is captured, and we can have another conversation about whether we need to change the definition itself. Like there are some parts that are like the principles of why do we need it and what freedoms do we want to grant. I think it's going to be hard to say that there is a need to change those principles. But what is the preferred form to modify? The role of data might change. Like from what I hear from researchers, it's not settled. It's not a settled matter yet how much the role of data is important to understand, for example, to study a system and to modify it. So with that, I leave space for your questions, and if you have any right now, you can also email me at Stefano@opensource.org.
Stefano, that is fantastic. We're bound to have a bunch of questions. What I'm going to do is just share my screen,
Mhm.
and I'm gonna ask sort of a softball but loaded question, which you alluded to a little bit in your talk. And this is just to open it up before the rest of the questions come. So the first question I have is from the sort of OpenChain side, and the question is, the time scale for the definition has seemed a little long, which is understandable because it's a complex subject. But I also noticed in your talk, you alluded to the fact that there might be some challenge in building consensus. And is that because people are very far apart on this topic, or because it's such a new topic, people don't quite know what they want yet?
Hard to tell, because hard to tell. So there are two elements that I see, and one more than well. So both are true. There are some people in the community who are not familiar with the technology itself, and they may really grasp a little bit too much on the concept of oh, this looks like software. Therefore, if software, we have the complete and corresponding source code concept, which requires everything, and I want to have everything. And they have also a very they have a perception of the world as really as a black and white, also with software. And that is one piece, and then there is another piece of the fear of the technology itself, like which was also, I mean, I have the same fear where these technology and the large corporation, especially who have the hardware to train large language models, they also have grabbed, let's use that word, a lot of data and content that has been produced without the knowledge that one day eventually that would be feeding into a machine that is doing things that are not necessarily in the interest of the people who have given that data. In other words, the example I give is the first time I realized that all the pictures that I have uploaded on myself on Flickr are now in a database and use the Creative Commons license. When it came out, it was a happy moment for the community. Wow, we have a tool, we can create new art out of this, and us artists can have, can use the creativity of others to build new things on top, and we were all contributing to the commons. Well, now that face that has been carefully labeled as my face is being used to recognize me as I walk around. Maybe I show up in a protest, I don't know, and that can be used really against me in by bad government or something like that, or so that is not exactly a use that I was sufficiently aware of at the time when I granted that right to the commons. And so people are reacting to that, like, wait a second, I uploaded my code, or my friend uploaded my code on GitHub, and now GitHub is using this to train a machine that is generating new code that will make my work less useful. So these fears are really part of in my mind, part of the reaction of around the definition. And then there is a third one, that is the market powers. And I get the sense that there are two companies that have more data than others. And so because they have, one has Gmail, one has Facebook, right? So they have more opportunities to accumulate even more data constantly. And other companies are maybe trying to to create moats around this. So I mean, there is also the role of the European Union and the geopolitical space, where again, big data means also invasion of privacy and respecting citizens' rights, that also become part of that game. So it's a really complex, really complex environment that is changing and evolving as we go, with multiple actors that we traditionally, the open source movement has not dealt with. Like, when was the time that we went to Washington, or we went to Brussels to to defend to talk about the GPL? Like, it was occasionally, right? Now it's regular.
That's a really good point. And, I'm going to just open the floor to people because I noticed Matthew unmuted, co-chair of AI study group. So, I'm guessing Matthew or others might have a question. So I'm just going to throw the floor open in case someone does.
Hi Shane, thanks for that. My question was, when you were reviewing the models like Bloom and Llama 2, and you kind of presented the work you'd done there, when you were looking to see if they met the open source AI definition, were all the results kind of as expected? As in Llama 2 didn't meet the criteria. Were there any surprises there?
No, for Llama 2 and 3, and really no surprises. For Bloom, it was interesting. Again, no surprise, because we knew that they did all the right things from the technical perspective and from the openness perspective, except that they picked the wrong license. Like the license of Llama is full of restrictions, and it's a very ineffective license. I mean, there's a longer conversation around the role of licenses that include builder use restrictions. But yeah, really no surprise. Bloom would be an open source AI if they changed the license, and Llama, there's no way. They just don't release the data preprocessing code. The training code is not known. For testing code is not available, and we don't know much about the data that they used. I've read opinions of experts I value that the Llama 3 paper is a lot more detailed on the information about their data processing, what they used, techniques for filtering and deduplication, removing bad words and all of that. It's more detailed, but still far away from what the community signal that they would expect in terms of data transparency.
Indeed, and whenever you define a definition, you need to give examples of things that don't meet that definition. And here is, a couple of good examples.
Exactly. It would be Grok, Llama, Mistral, Phi from Microsoft, the whole family of Phi, Gemma for sure. I mean, yes, they lack data transparency, and they have bad licenses. So the licenses piece is an interesting conversation that we will have to have at some point. To me, right now, it's less interesting. The license for the model weights. Right now, it's less urgent, in my opinion.
Thanks, Stefano.
Yep.
Stephen, I see you're unmuted.
Hi. Thanks, Shane. Thanks, Stefano. That's really interesting. I have lots of questions, but I'll start with one. Really, it was really interesting to see the connection you're making now to the model openness framework with the Linux Foundation project. My understanding of that definition, it previously allowed for grades of openness. And I just wonder in the collaboration, what discussion there's been around different degrees of openness, or whether you're taking a particular line of something is open or not.
Yeah.
So,
no, this was this is a very interesting one, because the degrees of openness have appeared multiple times during as a quick solution. But personally, I don't think that there is a solution in that degree of openness. First of all, because it would pollute the open source space, the open source software space, where there is a degree of openness, if you want. There is open core, what we call open core. There is commercial open source, and all the gray areas where some pieces of the system or a larger solution are open, and then are open source or distributed with an open source license, and the others are not. And then there is more open than other opens, like OpenStack, that defines the 4 opens together with, where open source software is one of the elements, but they also want an open community with open governance, with other concepts. So, but the open source definition really sets the bar. You can be always more open than just releasing the software code. And for example, you can have the persistence of openness with copyleft. You can have, again, you can have open governance. We call open source in the same way both something like SQLite, where the software doesn't accept patches, and OpenStack, with an open governance and open releases, etc. So, but open source as a definition, it sets the bar at one level. With the model openness framework, it's the same concept. You can have only open weights, and that's one bar, no one objects to the fact that open weights alone are useful artifacts that you can do a lot of interesting things with. But if you release a little bit of the tooling, then you really help the science to progress. And if you release a lot of the information about, if you add data transparency, then you're really making at least data transparency, then you're really making things much easier for the community of users, developers to understand the system that they have received, modify in a quicker way, without having to poke at the model, for example, and improve it. So the bar is going to be set at one level. Below, it's still going to be useful. Like we use Windows, some people use Zoom, right? It's still useful. But if you go above that bar, if you meet the bar, or if you go above the bar, it's better.
Great, thank you.
Right. I think we have time for one final question. So just pausing here to see if the audience has one. And just remember, no question is a bad question. We're here to dig into these things. Stephen again.
Thanks, Shane. Stefano, you said that you think that the timing will come for the debate around licenses. Could you sort of give a little preview of what you think is going to be important?
Yeah, I think that the important thing, there are many questions I have around licenses on weights, and the first one is whether there are licenses on weights and licenses. I mean, I use the term inappropriately on data and data sets. Those two pieces, I think, we need to clarify. Like, I haven't seen a coherent view from the legal community about whether the trained weights, so the parameters after the training, if they have any exclusive rights, for example, from the IP perspective, whether they're copyrightable or patentable, if they should be just considered facts, and so therefore it's sort of a public domain uncovered. But if they are this way, then what kind of contracts we need to have, and how do we evaluate those contracts, and how do we put them in the context of regulation? Like when we have regulation where that requires in Europe, it looks like that openly distributed weights must also release information about the data that they've been built with. So how, what's the role of the open source AI definition in this legal context, and how do we adapt to that? And what if the United States has a completely different approach? What if China has a completely different approach, and Japan, etc.? How do we make the definition work globally the same way that the open source definition works globally? And the other role is on the data set. Like some data set providers are very interested in distributing their data set to anyone who wants to use that for training systems that are also released openly. In other words, yeah. So what kind of contracts and how do we enable persistence of the freedom on that data set? Like if Common Crawl, let's say Common Crawl Foundation gives the data set to someone who then cleans up let's say Allen AI Institute cleans up that data, filters all the bad words, and creates a new data set from Common Crawl. Is there a way for Common Crawl to reclaim and say, please give it back to us? Maybe there is, right? It's a simple one-to-one contract, but then how does Common Crawl enforce Allen AI Institute when they distribute to others to use the same the same constraint, right? They need to be going back to Common Crawl or to a DI Institute. These are not, from the little conversations I've had with lawyers, these are not simple to solve at a global level. So we still have that conversation to go. And the last thing, I haven't mentioned this, we have in fact a workshop on data only, like just to discuss with the data aggregators, data distributors, data scientists community to understand a little bit better the space of data, to learn from the data open data movement, bring that knowledge into the open source software movement and vice versa. So starting to have cross communities conversations, because now, for us, for software people, data has always been, over there. And for them, the open data people, software was over on the other side. And now the two pieces of knowledge are merging in a very, very quick way.
All righty. And there, I think we reach the end of our allocated time. Stefano, when we started discussing having this update, we talked about how it's going to be useful to be able to share things with the audience throughout the summer period. And, you've brought a lot to the table. We'll be promoting this heavily on our social media, website, and mailing lists. And we do hope to send more people into the discussion. So it's so deeply appreciated you took this time. And please keep us appraised. Please let us know what's,
Absolutely.
yeah.
With pleasure. Thank you so much for the opportunity.
Yeah, it's wonderful to have you here. And I want to thank the live audience and everyone who asked a question. Thank you all, and have a beautiful day. Take care, stay healthy, and stay happy.
Bye-bye.